The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today for what promises to be a fascinating and thought-provoking discussion on a very relevant topic, employability and the skills gap in an era of digitization and intelligent technologies. Just to give you a sense of the importance of this topic, a recent report by Accenture states that India may have to forego as much as $1.97 trillion in GDP growth promised by investment in intelligent technologies over the next decade if the country fails to bridge the skills gap. Now, just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the skills gap, compared to the rest of the world, which has about 70% of its workforce that is skilled, countries like the UK, Germany, and Japan, India, with its billion-plus population, has only about 2% of its population that's skilled. So, as you can see, if this issue is not addressed immediately, it can turn into a real economic disaster. Accordingly, I am delighted to introduce our expert speaker, Mr. Akhil Shahani, who is Managing Director of the Shahani Group, one of India's premier higher education groups, with 100 years of experience in the education sector. The Shahani Group operates 24 colleges across Mumbai, as well as a SAGE Foundation, which provides education and skills training for 100 villages in Maharashtra. Mr. Shahani earned his MBA from Kellogg Graduate School of Management and is currently doing his PhD in student employability from Liverpool University. As part of his day-to-day activities, Akhil works closely with not only global education providers, but also with recruiters and industry specialists, and is therefore very well placed to share his insights on linking graduates with the skills businesses need in India and the importance of collaboration between industry and academia. I will now pass it on to Akhil to start the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tara, and let me just take control of the screen. Welcome, everybody. Let's welcome to this webinar on the future of work, and let's talk about the sort of skills that the graduates of who are currently studying in college today and will graduate from 2020 onwards. What are the skills that they're going to need? How are they going to deal with the world of work in the future? So let's talk a bit about what sort of world they're going to get into and what sort of world they're going to be working in. So in spite of a lot of media reports that all the jobs in the future are going to be taken over by robots and artificial intelligence, and we're all going to sit unemployed at home, that's actually not going to happen, luckily. So let me just give a little perspective here. Typically, when you look at artificial intelligence, typically you're looking at what is called specific artificial intelligence. That means that artificial intelligence is very good at doing a specific job that's trained for. So for example, the computer DeepMind that defeated Garry Kasparov in the chess game did very well, is a brilliant chess player. But when they had to create a computer to actually defeat the other player in the Asian game Go, it was a completely different computer. DeepMind could not shift its capabilities in chess into defeating players in the game Go. It's like saying that basically the sort of artificial intelligence that works very well in, let's say, data entry work cannot be trained to shift to customer service work. That has to be something very different as well. So typically what's going to happen in the future is that automation is going to work very well for jobs which are routine. That means that it's a very predictable job. The same work is done day in and day out in a repeated manner, and the machine is trained very well for that. On the other hand, the jobs which are going to grow and that's also going to require human beings are the jobs which are non-routine. So when you look at the table in front of us, for example, the routine manual work, like for example, factory workers, construction workers, farmers, they're immediately getting more and more taken over by automation and by robots. And the same thing goes with cognitive routine work. That means customer service callers now, like you're dealing with chatbots in customer service, customer sales, data entry, so on and so forth, because these are routine, predictable tasks. However, when you look at the non-routine work in the manual and the cognitive work, manual work like, let's say, a hairstylist, healthcare workers, which require the individual, the human being, to deal with a variety of situations, dealing with other human beings and applying their judgment and discernment and experience to deal with them. That AI can't really handle that very well as of now. The same thing goes with cognitive work, which is non-routine, like public relations, financial analysis, so on and so forth. So that means that the sort of skills that are going to be needed in the future are the skills that allow graduates to do very well in non-routine work, either cognitive or manual work. But let's talk a bit about the millennials, so-called this next generation that's coming into the world of work as we speak, and is actually going to be dominating the uh, the world of work for the next, let's say, 15 years at least. So let's talk a bit about some of the characteristics of their work style and what's going to be happening in their careers. The starting point is that most millennials will be following what's called a protean career. A protean comes from the god Proteus, the Greek god Proteus, who was able to change his form based on the situation. He could convert himself into a fish or a bird or a land animal based on the environment that he was put in. A protean career basically means that the graduate or the worker will be reinventing themselves every 2, 3 years to move into different jobs. So, for example, most graduates, when they leave college, typically don't say that they're going to stick on in their first job for more than a couple of years. There's nothing wrong with their first job. It's just that they actually want a new challenge. They want to keep on having more and more challenges, and that requires them to keep on either growing in the same company, going to the next level, or shifting their jobs to go to other companies or shifting industries. So you will actually see graduates today with another 40 years of their career in the future, probably having jobs in at least 5 or 6 different industries, right from media, finance. The same person could get into the media industry, the finance industry, the advertising industry, become an entrepreneur in the same career. That job for life does not exist anymore. On the second point of millennials is that they have a stronger sense of entitlement. Now, a lot of it is based on how parenting has been done for the last 20 years, where the kids are, like, let's say, they are awarded for their effort versus their achievement. Again, I'm not going to comment too much about if this is a good or bad, let's say, form of parenting, but the idea of the millennial says that, okay, I deserve the success. I believe that I deserve a better job. It's not that I'll accept what is given to me. It's more like I deserve to do better. I deserve that I can do anything that I want. I believe I can do anything I want. So that sense of entitlement pervades their work ethic and as they enter any new company, any new job. The third thing is they require a need for meaning. The thing is, it's not enough to work for a paycheck anymore. They actually want to believe that when they're working in a job, they're adding value to the world. There's a sense of meaning, a sense of achievement, a sense of pride in what they're doing. A classic example would be like the recent case of the employees of Google, the millennial employees of Google, all walked out and went on strike because Google had policies in China which they didn't agree with. Now, interestingly, this has nothing to do with their actual job in Google, one related to their paycheck. They just believe that the company that they work for should conform to a certain ethic or ethical practices that they believed in. That sense of meaning was important. The last thing is that they need a sense of autonomy. They do not like micromanagement. They do not want to be constantly told, okay, do this every minute of every day. They want to feel that the boss trusts them. They believe that they can perform. The boss just has to give them defined targets, and they need to achieve the target the way they want to do it in their own way. That sense of autonomy is very, very important for them. So these are the sort of millennials, these are the sort of work ethic that's going to have over the next 20 years, and companies will have to adapt to dealing with these millennials. Now, let's talk a bit about the concept of employability. Now, the thing is that when graduates leave college, they have to be employable over the long term. That means that, assuming in their protean career, they're going to be changing their job every 2, 3 years. That means employability means the ability to retain a job or to get a new job on a constant basis. It's not just enough to get your first job on graduation. You also have to make sure that you're continually employable. You can keep on getting jobs and advancing in your career. So let's talk about the sort of skills that a graduate would need to develop while they're in college or outside college to make sure that they're employable over the long term. But let's first talk about what employers want in the short term, because don't forget, most employers are more concerned about what jobs the graduates can do when they just graduate and the job that they have open at the employer's company. That means an employer doesn't care about long-term employability of the graduate. They just care about, can the graduate do the job that is currently in front of them right now. So most employers, and if you, regardless of what industry the employee comes from, the media industry, the finance industry, the creative industries, or let's say in manufacturing, typically research says that most employers want these 5 skills that graduates have. They basically want a graduate to have a strong positive attitude. That means ability to accept new roles and responsibilities and with a positive point of view. Graduate has to have very strong communication skills. They have to work very well in teams, working very well with others. Of course, they have to do very well solving problems, basically being thrown into different environments and solve problems on their feet and constantly come up with new solutions to undefined problems that will be thrown at them. And of course, the last thing is technical skills. Like, for example, if you are joining, let's say, a fast-moving consumer goods company in the sales role, you have to make sure that you're able to understand customer relationship management software. You should be able to fill in reports, use computer technology very well. If you are joining an investment bank, you have to be very, very strong in financial modeling and utilize the skills which are needed with Excel and things like that. So the technical skills relevant to the job are very important. Now, again, this is something that is only relevant for the job that is immediately available on graduation. However, what is interesting is that most employers don't necessarily want the graduate to be highly creative. In fact, it sort of reflects on the employer saying that, okay, the employer really said, look, I just want the person to come and do the job that is open to them and has to do the job based on what the manager tells them to do. They don't want them to come up with creative ideas and start brainstorming themselves. They want them to do the job, what is given to them at that time. However, if graduates want to be employable over the long term and make sure that they get jobs every 2 or 3 years, they have to make sure that they keep on developing themselves and making sure that they develop their creativity, ability to learn new things, ability to come up with new ideas. That's very important. They have to make sure that they can network very well, whether on online platforms like LinkedIn or Facebook, or offline when going to industry events, or making sure that they constantly meet new people for coffee or for lunch, that building up the network. And of course, the most important thing is that the skill sets that they've developed and the knowledge that they have today may be totally obsolete in 2 years' time. They have to constantly keep on upgrading their skills and have a love for lifelong learning. Constantly, and there are a lot of online resources today that they can learn from. So, but that love for lifelong learning is very critical to be employable over the long term. So moving on, let's talk a bit about the recruiting practices. Now, of course, when you look at companies today, they have a wider pool of employees, potential employees that they can hire from, a wider pool of graduates that they can hire from. But most companies are focusing on ways, more efficient ways, to make sure that this wide pool of graduates, wide pool of potential employees can be filtered out using technology to make sure they get the right employee for their specific job role. So let's talk about some of the examples of some companies, what they're doing to identify that. So for example, you take Novartis and Nielsen, they're using artificial intelligence and chatbots to actually pre-filter graduates. What happens is that they have, let's say, an open job role that's out there on, let's say, LinkedIn, or let's say on an online job site. The graduates will apply, and the graduates will then log in, and there'll be a chatbot that'll ask them a certain bunch of questions. Based on the way the graduate answers the questions, the graduate then moves to the next level of an interview where there's a human being answering those questions. But the initial filtration happens with the chatbot asking the questions to the graduate. Another thing which is done by companies like McKinsey and Deloitte, which actually require a higher level of graduate, a higher level of capability of employees, they do something called talent relationship management, which is a bit like customer relationship management, where every graduate who applies or to their company, even if the graduate may not be relevant for the job role that's open that day, they retain that graduate's resume on their roles or on their talent relationship management system. So that what happens that, let's say there's a job role that opens up in the future that might be suited to that graduate's talents, they can then identify that right graduate, look at their CV and say, okay, look, you couldn't get a job in, let's say, last year with us. Maybe you'll be able to get a job in this year with this job role. So maintaining a constant contact with talent that's come in earlier is a way to make sure that they can sort of go back to the same talent and make sure they can hire them when the time is right. Companies like Microsoft and Siemens are going after a much younger crowd now. In fact, they're using sites like Pinterest and Snapchat and Instagram, not so much LinkedIn or, let's say, Facebook, to go after the really younger audience of people between the age of 20 to 24, because they're more active on sites like Snapchat and Instagram, where they actually integrate with each other and build up their community. Interestingly, companies like Jaguar and British Army are using things like virtual reality to get potential graduates interested in joining them. So, for example, Jaguar actually has a virtual reality simulation of an experience of driving a Jaguar car on the road to make sure that the potential graduate gets excited about joining Jaguar Land Rover as a company and actually said, hey, I want to join this company which makes these cool cars. On the other hand, the British Army and earlier the American Army had actually come up with a first-person shooter game, which actually let graduates play the role of a soldier being trained on their computer and actually get thrown into different situations in war and things like that. So they actually have a sense of how it is to be a soldier in the British Army, and they get a little more excited and they believe that that is the sort of job that they want. So that is something that is a great source of recruitment for the British Army. Now, moving away from sourcing innovations, let's talk about even the interviewing innovation. So typically when you look at the classic recruitment model, the average company typically makes a decision on hiring a graduate based on looking at their CV and just doing a 10-minute, 15-minute interview with a person. And most of the time, the decision to hire the employee is based on gut feel. If the interviewer said, okay, do I like this person? Is there a cultural fit? Do I feel they're good? But unfortunately, this method is not very successful in making sure that they hire the right candidate, which is why very often when they hire a lot of candidates, there's almost like a 30% failure rate because the candidate may not work out very well in the job once they're actually in the job. So companies like, let's say, Citibank and KPMG are using psychometric tests to actually start assessing potential employees to see that do they have the right soft skills. They actually assess things like their proactiveness, their positive attitude, their ability to deal with stress, using a bunch of psychometric tests to pre-filter and to ensure that, okay, even though they sound very great on the interview, are they actually able to deal with stress based on the psychometric profiling that they have? So that has given them a better success rate than just a pure interviewing process. Another thing done by companies like Citadel and Mogul is actually doing a job audition, which is a bit like a structured internship where the candidate actually works in the job for a week to see how they like the job, and the company gets a chance to actually assess the candidate while they're working in the job role for a week's time. And at the end of the week, the company says, okay, if you perform well, we will give you the job offer versus, but there's no guarantee that you get the job, only if you perform well. So actually auditioning for the job is something that companies are looking at. Another thing, of course, is what Amazon and Lloyds Bank are doing, is that using virtual reality to give candidates a chance to actually work in the job, but through a virtual reality headset versus actually being auditioned for the job. And that actually allows them to scale up their recruitment to a much larger scale, because a lot of these candidates can actually do a virtual reality interaction with the job versus dealing with a physical job, like in a job audition. Of course, and this is a little more controversial, a company like HireView is using artificial intelligence to actually take video interviews of potential candidates, and based on how the candidate performs in the interview, if the candidate speaks in a certain way, the candidate comes up with certain phrases or certain words, has a certain amount of body language, the AI software will actually make decisions or make recommendations based on these characteristics. Now, we don't know how successful this model is, but that is something that companies are more increasingly trying to do, trying to use AI to actually try to come up with ideas based on video interviews, is that how the candidate could perform in the actual job. So agreed. So it's all very nice to say that, okay, they've got better hiring practices and better ways of assessing how employees can be potentially talented, but how do companies actually go out to get a talent to attract to them? Because ultimately you can open up the job to, let's say, 100 graduates, but how do you make sure 100 talented graduates apply to your job versus just people who actually graduate at the bottom of their class in college? So typically companies have to start doing things to make their company, the work more meaningful. They have to show that they're performing in a much more meaningful work than what they would offer otherwise. So for example, like if you are a medical systems company, you don't talk about things like, okay, look, we make medical equipment and we have sold to, let's say, 1,000 hospitals in the last 1 year. You have to talk about how the medical equipment is saving lives, how many cancer patients were cured, things like that, that give the potential graduate an idea that you go beyond just the facts and figures. You actually talk about the meaning and the sense of pride that you feel in the organization. Again, company culture also is very critical in that role. The thing is that you have to have a company culture that is not focused on micromanaging and making sure that you're a slave driver to these kids. You have to make sure that you give them a lot of autonomy, ability to grow themselves and make sure that they can perform to their satisfaction based on their own capabilities. Autonomy, of course, comes in. And again, this is the last thing about feedback. A lot of these millennials are used to playing video games. So therefore, for them, they actually like to get scores and get regular feedback as to how they're performing. They don't want to wait for the end of year assessment to see how they perform. Ideally, they want managers to give them autonomy, but they also want managers to give them feedback, if not every quarter, if not every month, at least every quarter, that, okay, look, you perform well in this, you can improve this way. So they feel that they are advancing in their skills and advancing in their job and making sure that they see a pathway that excites them. Again, so some things that companies can do to source talent. For example, like if you have employees which are doing very well in your company, it's great to ask them, do they know employees or potential, who were the employees that they loved in their past companies, and can you actually go out and give those employees from their past companies a job offer, because you know that if an employee has performed well in your company, they would probably know what your company culture is and the sort of people that will fit in your company. So referrals are a great way of getting potential talent. Again, as mentioned, is that making sure your job description on online portals sounds exciting. There's a lot of meaning that's shown. It looks like it's not a job that's based on the salary and based on the work that needs to be done. It's really more what is the contribution that you're giving to society and how the company culture is. Of course, remaining in touch with past candidates, that's a bit like talent management, like what Deloitte and McKinsey were doing, is that making sure that every candidate that comes for a job interview, you make sure that you retain their CV and you have a way to source out these past CVs to see if the candidate may be relevant for the job that you have today. If they were not relevant for the job earlier, they may be useful for the job today. And of course, the last thing I think which most companies could do more of is develop talent at the source. That means actually integrate, work closely with the universities which is training the talent. The universities have these graduates for 3 to 5 years. Now, how do you actually work with the university to make sure that when these kids graduate, they actually have the right talent and the skill sets that companies search for? So let's talk a bit about what some companies can do to build talent at the source. Now, very often the classic role of companies was say that, okay, look, let a university graduate these students, send them all to us for interviews. We will pick and choose who we want. But that wasn't really a great method because the failure rate was very high in that case. However, if a company is able to go to a university and say, look, we have a requirement of hiring, let's say, these 100 people over the next 1 year, and these are the skill sets that we're looking for, the university has an advance notice that this is the sort of jobs which are that the students have to apply for, and therefore they want to make sure that the students have an ability to train themselves for the jobs before they graduate, such that they know what they're getting, instead of the students graduating then getting a surprise at the interview process and saying, hey, we don't have the skill sets needed. So the more companies are able to share their recruitment goals with universities, the better universities are able to skill the students to make sure that they provide the right students for those companies. Another thing, of course, is which is happening more and more frequently internationally, but I think now it needs to happen more so in India, is to get companies to start giving inputs into university curriculum. Like, for example, very often academics and corporate managers generally don't talk much to each other. I mean, they give a lot of lip service, but if corporate managers are able to sit with academics and say, look, this is the sort of skill set that we want, and these are sort of technical skills that we would look to your students to develop. Can you develop those in your course curriculum? That would be important, because then you can work together to come up with a course curriculum that is important and make sure that these graduates are employable. Another thing is important is there's absolutely nothing beats an internship or project in the company. Allowing a student to do an internship in the company is something that is brilliant, because the student gets a chance to actually work in a live environment. And more importantly, the company gets a chance to assess the student during the internship to see if that's the right graduate that they want to offer a job to when they graduate. Now, one thing that's very important is that the internship has to be monitored. There has to be a defined outcome for the internship. Very often companies take internships as like necessary evils. A student comes in, the student is allocated to a low-level manager, and the low-level manager just has to deal with the student and just gives them some basic work without actually looking to develop the student. You need to monitor the interns, make sure that they actually do a good job, give them feedback, give them advice, make them feel comfortable, make sure that they're able to develop something while they're interning in the company, because that ensures that there's a better feedback to the student, and the student is more excited about joining the company on graduation. Another easy thing to do is actually invite students, college groups, to actually go and tour the company operations, because it's all very nice to say, hey, we make medical machinery, but actually getting a student a tour of the factory to see how the magic is created is something that could excite the student about the manufacturing process and get them excited about joining the company to get meaning out of their work. Some examples, some companies have done a great job. Philips, for example, has done a great job with Cambridge University. Cambridge has a strong biotech healthcare curriculum, and Philips is actually beginning inputs into Cambridge to develop their curriculum further. Google, of course, a very famous Stanford University, has a very close connect with companies in Silicon Valley. Google being a prime example where they actually do a lot of inputs into Stanford's curriculum and interact with their professors on a constant basis. Even in India, for example, my own group of colleges, the HSNC group of colleges, the 24 of our colleges, we have partnered with the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, to get inputs into our curriculum and to make sure that we're able to get our students to be more employable than what they were earlier. So there are examples out there in the world. But let's talk a bit about collaboration between British universities and India, because a lot of the audience members I know here are from British universities, and they're looking for how can they work in the Indian market and collaborate with Indian universities. Well, as mentioned earlier, the thing is that India has one of the largest portions. There are 300 million people under the age of 25 who are, that means that these people are ready for education and ready for entering the job market. But as mentioned earlier, surveys say that 80% of these graduates are not employable. And there's a huge demand for reskilling these graduates to service India's workforce needs over the next decade. So there's a huge gap between what is being outputted by Indian colleges and what companies need. Now, interestingly, in the UK, there's a lot of research happening on employability. Advanced HE, CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, has come up with surveys, has come up with reports that gives universities advice on how to make their students employable. They've actually given them suggestions as to how to give them the attitudes and the skills which were mentioned earlier, give them a positive attitude, how to develop them into develop their critical thinking, develop their problem-solving ability, developing their proactiveness to make sure that they're employable. A lot of that research can be shared with Indian universities, and a lot of the universities which have implemented that in the UK can actually share their best practices with Indian universities and collaborate with them. In India, there is the Confederation of Indian Industry, the NSDC, the National Skills Development Corporation, which is trying to develop skills in India. But again, these are very early stage, and they haven't really developed to the level that British universities have got. Of course, sharing best practices between universities is important. Having exchange programs, a lot of universities in India and the UK have faculty exchanges where British faculty come to India, Indian faculty go to the UK, so that's all there. There's also British universities can actually help to develop curricula of Indian universities, and at long term actually have joint courses with Indian universities where, in fact, there are examples which I will share in the next slide, where British universities have partnered with Indian universities and they're offering their course curriculum in India to Indian students. Of course, there are a lot of joint research opportunities as well. India is a huge market. We have like 29 states and one of the widest variety of environments. Like we have deserts, we have mountains, we have tropical rainforests, and also a lot of universities can actually do research in India to actually develop contract research for companies in the UK. So for example, a lot of pharma companies actually love India's ecosystem because there's such a wide variety of different environments and different ethnic groups that can be utilized for research in pharmaceuticals and things like that. So joint research is something that is a huge opportunity for British and Indian universities alike. Now, let's talk a bit about some examples of collaboration. In fact, in spite of what you may have heard that India doesn't welcome a lot of international universities in, actually there have been exactly about 128 examples of collaboration between foreign universities and Indian universities. And I'm going to list out some of them in this slide. Right from the starting point, Harvard University itself has a dedicated India Research Center, which does a lot of research in the Indian companies and the Indian environment and creates case studies, which it then shares with their Harvard University HBS students abroad. And they also do sell these case studies to other universities around the world. A lot of Indian case studies are developed in their India Research Center. Interestingly, De Montfort University and Daly College in Indore have actually been running a joint course in India for the last 15 years. What is interesting is that this joint course is actually recognized by the government. The government of India said, okay, fine, we recognize that this UK university and the Indian university can collaborate and give a joint degree which is recognized in India, and the government accepts that. That means that these pathways are available for foreign universities. But of course, it takes a lot of time and effort to build these joint courses. An easy thing, of course, is executive education. There's a huge demand by working executives to actually upskill themselves. So colleges like Babson, a few others are actually running week-long programs or weekend programs where they upskill executives in areas like, let's say, data analytics, supply chain management, so on and so forth, with the diploma being offered by the foreign institution. King's College had actually collaborated with one of our own colleges, HR College, and they offered a summer school to students in India. What happened is that they came down and we had professors from King's College coming down and teaching students for 2 weeks over summer, during a summer vacation, and that excited the students enough to say, hey, we'd actually consider joining King's College when we graduate from our 12th grade program and maybe move on to the undergraduate, postgraduate level at King's College. So that was something that allowed King's College to promote their brand in India. Top-up pathways, in fact, our own business school, Shahani Center for Management, TSCFM, works with Anglo-Ruskin University, where we have our students study for a 2-year MBA, where the first year is done here in India, and the last few modules are done online with Anglo-Ruskin University, which then leads to a full-fledged MBA offered by Anglo-Ruskin University to our Indian students. Another option of that is a training program where with GD Goenka and Lancaster University, where GD Goenka and Lancaster University have a system where the students study 2 years in India in GD Goenka, and the last year they physically go to Lancaster University and take the last year of their course in Lancaster and get the degree from Lancaster. Unlike the top-up pathway mentioned earlier, where Anglo-Ruskin University provides the pathway online to our students in TSCFM. You also have accredited courses like Parsons has worked with the Indian School of Design and Innovation, ISDI. What Parsons has said that Parsons allows the ISDI to create course content which is validated by Parsons, and Parsons also puts their accreditation on these courses. But they do not give the diploma in India. What Parsons says is that if the student has graduated from ISDI under the Parsons program, they have the opportunity to join the last year, the 4th year of a Parsons degree in New York at the Parsons Design School. That's an entry opportunity. But Parsons does lend their brand name to ISDI in India to attract students. The last one, of course, is exchange program, which happens very often with a lot of colleges in India and a lot of universities, where ITM, College LaSalle, for example, would be faculty going abroad, faculty coming down here, faculty from abroad teaching Indian students, Indian faculty teaching the students from abroad, students themselves also going for exchange programs. That's a very common thing that happens, and that is one of the easiest pathways for setting up collaboration between foreign universities in India. Now, I think we've actually had quite a broad of understanding of the future of work and the skills needed and the way British universities and Indian universities can collaborate. But I'm sure there are a lot of questions that you all have. So I think at this point, I'd like to open the floor to questions, and happy to answer whatever you want to ask me. Tara?
Thank you, dear Akhil, for your excellent presentation and for all the good examples of the different kinds of collaborations that foreign universities are pursuing in India. That's really good to know, and it shows that there's potential to do so much more. So I will actually now, we're going to start the question session. I've asked attendees to type their questions in the chat box, and we have quite a few questions, but I'll start with 2 of mine, if that's all right. And then we have about 6 or 7 more questions. So just to kick off, it's clear that there needs to be much more collaboration and communication between universities and industry to address the skills gap. What would you say is the government's role in bridging the skills gap? And one more sort of related question is, in your experience, given the skills gap, how much do you think Indian universities and colleges are adapting to deliver these changing skills and incorporate them in their course curriculum?
Okay, well, let's first define the role of the government first, and then we move on to the second question. Now, if you look at what's happened in the UK, the government has supported research with, like I said, non-profits like Advanced AHE and CBI, where they said that we fund research and we'll also come up with suggestions for employability, how universities can make their graduates employable. In fact, they came up with a range of employability skills. However, the British government said these are just suggestions and guidelines. the government did not impose these guidelines on the universities. The government did not say, okay, you have to train your graduates in this way to develop these skills. In fact, most universities would bristle at government interference in their curriculum. The government can just suggest, but cannot force. Similarly, in India, in fact, the government has funded some research, but again, the government really can't force companies or colleges to adapt to it. It's really more for the colleges and companies themselves to sort of adapt these guidelines to make sure that these graduates are employable, which actually leads on to the second question. What's happened is that when you look at, let's say, universities in India and universities abroad, now, if you look at the universities which are ranked among the top 10, top 20, they have a lot of students coming to them, and they don't have a shortage of students applying for admission, and they can be very selective. But when you look away from the tier 1 universities, look at the tier 2 institutions, they need to develop, they have to focus a lot on getting student admission, because a lot of their revenue comes in from student fees, unlike the larger universities which have endowments from government or for research grants. So for them, they have to find ways to attract more and more students. Now, typically the students themselves are now saying that, hey, we are spending a lot of money on our education. Typically a student graduates with, 20,000 pounds, 25,000 pounds worth of debt, a student loan. And what they say is that, okay, what is the job that I'm getting on graduation? You have to justify the amount of money I'm spending on the fees. So the colleges which are focusing on attracting more and more students are the ones who are more willing to actually adopt new standards, get access to the employability standard, start actually training the students to make them more employable, and actually are proactively going and talking to companies and trying to get them to give inputs into their curriculum. In fact, a lot that's happening with the business schools in India, because the business schools have to attract more and more students today. So for them, they actually have gone out and got a lot of companies to give inputs into their curriculum. But of course, this is just early stages yet. I think this thing about companies and colleges collaborating is going to get more and more prominent as students get more demanding about career outcomes and making sure that they can justify the amount of money they're paying for their fees.
Thank you. That's brilliant and really answers the question. So I will now move on to the questions from John Alessi from Eurocenters, a company which specializes in soft skills, leadership skills, and communication skills. Sure. John has got 3 questions, so I'll read all of them out. They're all sort of related. He says, soft employability skills such as creativity, problem solving, etc. in UK universities are intrinsic and form part of the teaching methodology rather than such individual skills being taught in specific classes. Given that scenario, how do you approach teaching these skills in India? And I'll say the next question as well. As an organization that focuses primarily on developing strong, measurable, and certifiable soft skills, he's talking about Eurocenters, would it be more logical to approach employers in India or the mid-tier universities that you mentioned? Or does it make sense to approach both to present such solutions? Is that all right for you? Okay.
Yeah, sure. Great. Is it third question, or do you want me to answer these 2 first?
No, so that's all of them. That's from John Alessi from Eurocenters.
Great. All right. So let me talk about the first part about critical thinking and the pedagogy in the UK versus India. Now, you're right. In fact, the UK does focus a lot on critical thinking, making sure that students can work well in collaborative projects, and making sure that there's a strong amount of anti-plagiarism, and making sure that the student applies their mind. India, unfortunately, is still focused on a rote learning-driven, exam-oriented environment where the student is given a defined bit of knowledge to study from a textbook, and they have to sort of mug it up and sort of vomit it out in the exam at the end until the next textbook and the next subject. So trying to get that cultural change between the Indian method of education and the UK method of education, of course, is taking time. Some colleges in India have realized that they need to develop critical thinking skills in their students, and it's slowly happening. But of course, there's a long way to go before they adopt those practices in India. In fact, this rote learning methodology is not just unique to India. In fact, even look at China, Korea, and other Asian nations. The focus on the exam is actually more paramount than the focus on critical thinking and developing reasoning skills. So I think there's a lot of potential there, which leads to the second question, is that when you are a soft skills developer, where you actually come up with employability skills for companies and for colleges, Now, there have been companies in India which have defined employability skills in the past. They've already have defined, okay, these are the skills that employers need. Now, the issue that they faced was that when they tried to help colleges in India with these skills, and they said, okay, look, we will test your students for these employability skills, and we will help you come up with employable students. The colleges asked them the question, okay, look, you're giving us the employability skills and you're helping us with employable students, but do the companies themselves recognize the employable skills? And do they also, are they preferring to hire students with these defined employability skills that you are offering? And then when they went to the companies, and the companies asked the same question, they said, look, okay, we understand the employability skills, but are the colleges willing to sort of adapt to them? So what you actually really need to do, you can't ignore the companies or the colleges. You have to get them both on the same page to make sure that they speak the same language and they agree to these employability skills, and make sure that the colleges are able to train the students for these skills, and the companies are willing to hire students with these skills, prefer to hire students with these skills compared to other students. So you have to get both parties on the table.
Thank you, Akhil. I think it means more of a mindset shift in terms of how you approach employability skills.
Correct.
Yeah, thanks very much. The next question is from Devesh Anand from University of Bristol. He said, we see reports in media indicating students with an education abroad are preferred by employers in India due to the soft skills and practical approach enhancement. However, is that the reality, because the remuneration expectation of these students is higher than those studying in India? Also,
Okay.
the question just continues. Also, are there any reports by the government of India or industry done to substantiate this?
Okay, so let's talk a bit about the reality first. The thing is that, and this has actually happened more frequently in the last few years, as with the visa regime in the UK and the US has got tougher and tougher. A lot of students who went abroad with the hope of getting work in the UK are now coming back to India. And of course, they've spent a good amount of money for their education. Now, exactly right. So the thing is that students are coming back to India and hoping to get higher paid jobs with employers in India. Now, the problem with most employers in India, of course, they would prefer a student with a foreign degree compared to an Indian degree. However, their willingness to pay higher salaries to these students is unfortunately not there. Most employers are saying, look, let's hire these students, let's see how they perform, and then we'll maybe get them, let's say, promotions in advance of other students or other employees. Because don't forget is that a lot of these students, especially at the undergraduate level, have never worked in the real world. So for them, they've both been to college, but they've never actually had an experience of working, managing other people or working with other people. So their ability or their personalities may be very similar. So what companies are saying is that, okay, look, we will give them the same salary or slightly higher salary than what Indian graduates are getting, but let's see how they perform. If their foreign degree is that great, they will they will advance in our company much faster than the average Indian employee. So that is a way that gives them. So over the long term, a foreign degree is better in India, but over the short term, you start with the same level. The second question about Indian government, do they actually have any reports that say that foreign degrees are preferred in India? Well, fortunately or unfortunately, the Indian government is more concerned about Indian universities and Indian colleges. They really don't care much about foreign university, foreign degrees. They think that's not in their purview. So unfortunately, I've not seen any reports that talk about foreign degrees in India, at least what's come out from the government.
Thank you, Akhil. That's really helpful as well, and good to know. The next question is from Ratula Chakrabarti from University of East Anglia. Just one question. What would be the best way for British universities to link up with Indian institutions where the union would be a win-win for both parties and the early connection is facilitated by the regional or central government?
Okay. Well, I think again, I would not expect the central government or the regional government in India to facilitate linkages between foreign universities and Indian universities. That said, there are a lot of if you look at, let's say, the organizations like the UK India Business Council, UKIBC, I think non-profits like that are fantastic at facilitating connections between Indian universities and British universities. And of course, this is not a paid plug. This is actually what I genuinely believe. But seriously, nothing beats just coming to India, meeting universities, fixing up the appointments, and nothing beats just hardcore meeting people, having coffee with them, understanding the Indian university mindset, talking about your offerings, talking about ways to collaborate. There's no big bang approach or let's say a silver bullet that solves it. You have to come to India and constantly meet universities. Of course, the second thing is very important is that be aware that the Indian university system and the British university system are very different. I've seen a lot of cases where the British university comes down and they have to then go back to their senate in the university and say, look, you have to make these changes or make some adjustments in your program to work with Indian universities, and the senate takes their own sweet time to decide to make these changes. So very often getting MOUs signed is not difficult, but actually executing on those MOUs requires a lot of hard work from both sides to work with that. But as I mentioned, there was 128 collaborations happening so far in India from British universities and Indian universities. So of course these models are available, and they just basically just go out and do it. There's nothing, there's no shortcut to it.
Thanks, Akhil. Thank you especially for the shout out to UKIBC, which, as he said, is just what he feels. Thanks for that. And I would just say that I completely agree with you that you just have to go out there and look for the collaborations. We can definitely help with that. The appetite for collaboration and partnerships from Indian institutions is huge, and therefore it just means matching the right institution with the right Indian institution with the right British institution, and we can certainly help with that. So thanks again. The next question is from Carol Still, University of Coventry, London. Carol says, soft skills are integral to cognition, which is the mental action of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and senses. Taking this definition, how do you suggest Indian employers can shift their value of rote-based learning to a more holistic development of the student?
Okay.
So should I say the next question from Carol? Do you want to take both?
Yeah, I'll take it as well.
Yeah, so the second question, and this is the last question of our webinar, is there an opportunity for UK universities to work at school level in India to help start the skills journey at a much younger age? Would there be any education grants for such activity?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first. Well, of course, there are a lot of opportunities for universities to work with schools in India. In fact, a lot of Indian schools, especially schools. Okay, so a lot of Indian schools are what is called international schools. That means they offer the international baccalaureate degree, a diploma in the 12th grade, and some of them have also adapted to the IGCSE Cambridge exam. So they actually do provide a lot of experiential learning and a lot of development of creative and critical thinking in their thing. So a lot of them actually are quite happy to work with British universities to enhance their capabilities and of course find ways to collaborate. So that there's a lot of options available for working with Indian schools. Again, but unfortunately there's no government funding. Unfortunately there's not much Indian government funding at all to facilitate foreign universities working in India. You just have to find ways to fund it yourself or have local companies or local partners do that for you. But again, the opportunity is there. The earlier question about what companies can do themselves. So typically what happens is that, and of course, because most Indian colleges focus on rote learning, a lot of companies have sort of given up on finding employable graduates from these colleges. So what they say is that, okay, we will let these graduates come in, we will train them for the first 6 months to a year. Hopefully we will immerse them in different projects and different company work, such that develop their capabilities and employability capabilities while they're working in the company. Of course, the unfortunate issue is there that a lot of these millennials themselves, after they have been trained, they will leave that company and join another company. So that tends to be an issue here. So the companies, of course, are very happy to give inputs into colleges to make them to get their students employable. And as I said earlier, is that the colleges which actually want to show better learning outcomes and better career outcomes for their students are willing to work with companies to make sure that their kids are employable and develop their critical thinking capabilities and soft skills. But again, this is these are early days right now. I mean, the opportunity is there, but it'll take a long time before you get the majority of colleges to adapt to these new methods of teaching.
Thank you, Akhil. That is absolutely spot on. I think it's about a mindset shift, and it's kind of the start of the journey. More and more, you're realizing how important it is to collaborate between universities and industry to bridge the skills gap. And I would also just add on to Carol's question, just to say that it's really important to actually look at look at reaching out to Indian schools which cater to, the poorer sections of society and offer skills expertise, UK skills expertise at that level, because it's there where the masses are, and it's there where the education is, it's not very good at all. So that's a huge area where British universities, if they do have the capability and the interest, should focus on using online methods, for example, among other ways. So yeah, thank you very much. It's been an excellent session, Akhil. And hopefully, the feedback so far has been really good, but I'm sure if there are any other questions, we will send them across to you. Thanks again.
Definitely happy to take any questions offline, and I hope this was very useful for all the participants.
I'm sure it was. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. All right. Bye-bye.